Like, so for anyone listening that's new to this, so if you were to differentiate taste and flavor, how do you separate them?
So I think the simple
And
way
why
to think
would
about
you?
Okay, so two different questions. So the simple way to think about taste is it's sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. It's a series of receptors that you have in your mouth, largely in your tongue, but also in your throat and all the way down to your gut and beyond. And we all pretty much know what they are. So if you have something sweet, you know that it's sweet. If you have something sour, you know that it's sour. If you have something bitter, you often want to spit it out. Flavor is completely different. Flavor is basically what you get from your sense of smell, and it's an aroma. And basically, humans are pretty unique in the sense that we can detect aromas, not just by sniffing something, but also when we put something in our mouth, it releases the volatiles and the aromas. And we basically have what we call retronasal olfaction, and which is a fancy way of saying it releases the aromas and we get this amazing sense of flavor. And you guys are all really all about flavor because, you know, we were just up at the farm, we were just having all these amazing tomatoes, all these amazing other vegetables. That amazing lunch that you gave me, that was all about flavor. It wasn't, you know, like loads of sugar, salt, and fat all combined together. It's about releasing that. And you can only do that by working with nature.
So is flavor almost like, you know, and you gave an example over lunch. You were saying that certain types of like ferments, the reason why we like acidic, we've been trained over millions of years, like acidic is a taste which we like is because it's high in potassium and other different minerals, and this is why we're drawn towards these different things. So is flavor a representation of nutrients as well, whereas taste is receptors in our tongue?
So taste is receptors in our tongue, and we basically have these taste receptors almost as a means of survival. So here's a weird one for you. I
love weird ones. Great.
This is a weird one. We all have taste receptors in our ears for sourness.
Wow.
Now, we don't really eat with our ears very much. But the theory is that we've got this taste receptor for sourness in our ears because we kept it from being fishes. And sourness is basically acidity. And so if you're a fish and you shouldn't be swimming somewhere, that's where you detect it from. So there are all these strange places where we have these protein receptors, these taste receptors, which can react to different chemicals and give us that. So bitterness is generally meaning may not be quite ready to eat, maybe, you know, warning you off it. Sweetness is
bitterness could be like you take an unripe gooseberry, for example, and it's really pucker. Like it draws all the moisture out of the mouth and you're like, I don't know if you can relate to that, but that's pucker, that's bitter, that's astringent.
That's astringency too.
Yeah, astringency versus bitter.
Bitterness.
But they're
they
related.
Generally go together. They generally go together, except in Japan where you've got the kaki. But generally bitterness and astringency do. But bitterness is, you know, lots of, you know, the face that somebody puts on bitterness, it's that sort of
grimace.
You almost want to get rid of it, don't you? And then sort of, you know, the argument for umami, which is that thing you get when you cook vegetables or when you cook meat, is that it's basically a way of sort of saying that this food is highly dense in sort of various nutrients like potassium and nitrogen and all that sort of stuff. So there is this sort of theory, which is that all of our taste buds are there to basically help us figure out what we should be eating. Whereas flavor is what we get delight in. And it's a way of sort of savoring, I think. But I think flavor is our great defense against ultra-processed foods and all the baddies in food and all the other stuff that we get.
Because flavor is the subtlety. Flavor is the one that one has to kind of stop and almost like ponder and consider. It's less like, you know, you eat something salty, that's salty. Whereas to get the subtle aromas, they have to travel from your tongue up the back of your nose or your retronasal pathway up to your olfactory glands or your taste receptors in your nose.
Yeah.
Your flavor receptors as opposed to your taste receptors.
No, this would be your taste, isn't it?
No, tongue taste.
Tongue taste. Flavor is olfactory, it's your sense of smell. And you're right, it does. So if you basically, when we do the tasting tonight with the team, what we're going to discover is that, you know, everybody can taste sweetness and sourness and bitterness incredibly quickly. Right? Sweetness is literally the fastest thing that hits your brain, faster than any sort of drug, nicotine or anything else. It's literally, you know, 3/50 of a second. Whereas you're right, flavor, you've got to let the chocolate melt, for example, and it takes 3 to 5 seconds minimum for it to start to develop. And then the wonderful thing about flavor is you go on this journey. So you get all these different flavors coming through. So like when you have one of your tomatoes, it's just amazing because you sort of start with a bit of taste, bit of texture, and then you sort of get all these different aromas. And it's like going on a journey. It's like having a good conversation. You know, you're sort of saying hello to the tomato and what's going to happen, and you're getting to, you know, be quite intimate with it.
It's a wave. You talk about like flavor hits your taste. Flavor hits you as a wave.
Yeah, I think that is right. I think that it's really good to have a vocab around flavor so you can articulate it. So I think flavor wheels are really useful. But the only thing I think which is problematic with them, there's two problems with them. One of them is that they don't They're good for helping you articulate it so you can maybe remember it and appreciate it a bit more. But the problem is they don't give you this idea of a journey, which is what you should get with great food. Like, the lunch you just gave me, that was amazing because it was all these different flavors, but they all developed in different ways. Like the bean curry, which is just fantastic. Or the potatoes. They were amazing how they sort of started as being sort of quite caramelly, and then you sort of get all this nutty notes, but you just get these completely different flavor sensations as you go through it. And I think that the problem with the flavor wheel is it tends to just get you to focus on one thing, which isn't necessarily what you want to be doing. You want to be looking more for the journey.
And a flavor wheel for anyone listening is it's like a circle with various different pies on it, which has different colors and different kind of, descriptions of what things might taste. And often like it's easy to describe a flavor via visual mechanism. Like certainly in coffee and chocolate, there'll be a flavor wheel, and probably is in wine and these other things, because we don't, like you, and we've only learned this from you, most people don't have the vocab to describe flavor. Like we can always say sweet, oh, that's a very sweet bar chocolate. Oh, it's a bit bitter, I don't really like it. Oh, it's very acidic, or whatever. People can often describe these things, but flavor is a different
and it's really interesting.
vocabulary.
If you don't have the vocab, it's really problematic. We were chatting about this before. So there's this intriguing concept called verbal overshadowing, which is a fancy way of basically saying that if you ask somebody who's just been robbed or been mugged or anything to describe the criminal after the crime, they are actually less likely later to be able to identify the criminal in a police lineup than if you not ask them to describe it. And the same thing is true when basically people have tried with wine to get people to describe the wine that they've just tried. They are less likely later to be able to pick it out blind from a series of other wines. And the hypothesis here is that if you don't have the vocab and you sort of use the wrong words or use words which you're not familiar with and you don't associate, so not the wrong words, but just words that you can remember and associate, you'll actually confuse yourself more and not be able to pick it out as well as if you'd said nothing. But if you train people, just as you train people with different colors and other stuff, once you've learned to recognize it and you write it down, you can easily remember it. So it's a question of just developing that skill with those flavors. And once you've got it as well, it also makes you step back and think a little bit more and savor it a bit more. And in fact, I think that's actually, one of the reasons why these flavor wheels were invented, I think they come out of University College Davis. So basically up Sacramento, sort of California back in the 1960s. And they were developed to help people appreciate what good wine is about. Because, you all can sort of tell the difference, but between a good wine and not necessarily as sophisticated a wine. But it helps to have the vocab because that helps you appreciate it a bit more and you can appreciate and understand it a bit more. And that'll sort of help you go on the journey. And once you do that, you can savor it a bit more and you'll get more out of it.
And I think that leads into like one of your favorite, or an expression that I love of yours is like savor, don't scoff. And you see that as a wonderful gateway to kind of addressing greater societal issues. And I think that's an incredible motto for life.